This is RossDraws. We all know him by his iconic vibrant painting style and his bright, energetic personality. But there's one more thing he's known for.
It's color dodge time! It's color dodge time! It's color dodge time!
So in this video, I'm going to find out what's so special about this blend mode, why Ross used it in literally every single video of his, and more importantly, how he uses it. Is it just a circus act for his videos? Or is it actually a hidden gem? So maybe you already know what color dodge does, but in case you don't, here's a quick rundown. Okay, so the color dodge mode lightens the color of base layers and reduces the contrast. Okay, but what does that mean? And how is it different from these other blending modes? To understand how it really works, we're going to have a little demonstration here. The 5 balls you see represents the blending modes that belong in the lighten group, which is one of the 7 groups of blending modes in Photoshop. These 3 blending modes only make the base color lighter. There are subtle nuances between them, but they basically do the same job. Compared to these 2, they're simply more juicy looking. Jokes aside, they do look very similar right now, but they can have wildly different effects when you switch up the base or blend color. Just a quick common example, with a darker base plus a lighter blend, color dodge gives this much more saturated result compared to linear dot. Of course, there are many other subtle differences as well if you use different combinations. For example, a light base and a dark blend will give you this. But for the video's sake, let's just leave it at that. I mean, 95% of the time we would be using the dark base plus light blend setup anyway. So why is this difference important? Why specifically color dodge? I'm sure you have seen this in real life before. Turns out there's this natural phenomenon called subsurface scattering. Without going too deep into the science, it's basically light penetrating into translucent materials. The light then scatters by interacting with the material by bouncing back and forth, eventually exits the surface of the material and into the viewer's eye, resulting in a saturated glow. And this is precisely what Ross is trying to achieve with color dodge. Which brings us to the setup. From what I can gather in his videos, Ross uses a standard airbrush and he picks mid-tone colors for color dodging. He also changes the brush taper and size when needed to fit the shape of the light he's trying to paint. Now that that's out of the way, let's quickly explore the 3 main ways of how Ross uses color dodge in his painting. I did some quick research on Ross's ArtStation and found out that this is the value structure Ross uses like 80% of the time, especially in his earlier painting. He tends to gravitate towards a brighter background and a darker character. So naturally, Ross prefers to go for the kind of lighting setup where the main light source is placed behind the character, aka backlight. Using a big airbrush, he color dodges the background to further highlight the character. If you remember, color dodge makes the midtones saturated and blow out the lights. This is incredibly smart by Ross because it acts as a really subtle secondary framing for the character. He does this all the time. You can see here how the light has the highest exposure around the character and it slowly becomes more saturated and darker as it goes to the edge of the canvas. Or in one word, vignette. And all of this with a single stroke of color dodge. Maybe. Another little trick he does here is color dodging on the focal points like the eyes, the hair, and power effects. This is pretty straightforward. He just adds color dodge to the effects to give them more contrast. He usually uses these power effects and hair for flow and compositional purposes. Adding color dodge to these areas gives them more contrast, so it helps to direct the eye across the canvas. On a side note, the other thing he does with hair is using it to frame the face. He usually doesn't color dodge too close to the face and leaves a small darker frame of hair around the face. Speaking of the face, the third thing that he does is color dodging the face. Since the face is the main focal point, Ross often adds another layer of light on the face to bring more interest to that area. Color dodge is perfect here for simulating that subsurface scattering effect that we have been discussing when strong light hits the skin. He also adds a subtle bounce light in most of his paintings to add more contrast and gradient to the face. And I do have to mention that that's the key to all of this. He's subtle, just like what Ross himself said.
It might sound weird coming from me, but don't overdo color dodge because it can instantly blow out your painting.
Now, knowing all of this, let's try to use color dodge on this Nima fan art that I made. Here's a quick 10-second time lapse to show you guys how I got to this point. I added some cheeky power effects with the lasso fill too. I want to make it like a burning sword. I am imagining a moment where Nima is sheathing. Nima is sheathing her sword right after she sliced her enemy. Add that sexy bounce light on Nima's face. Here I used an airbrush at 50% opacity. Since her sword is burning, it'd be cool to make the ground behind her burning as well. Nima has white hair, and looking at how Ross usually handles her, he typically pairs her with a slightly darker background to emphasize her silhouette. This will simulate that framing technique we learned earlier and pop the character from the background even more by having contrast all over her silhouette. I want to make the light frame a little smaller so they don't clash with her white hair. Some cool particle effects, more color dodging, and the most important part, this was very refreshing and a different approach to what I usually do. My approach is usually more rigid and calculative, just like when I painted this piece of Iris from Hololive that you should definitely watch next. Oh, and just to stay in character, remember, every day is a color dodge day. Bye!